Hello everyone and welcome to this Genesys Customer Care Tech tutorial. Today we have Garima Baldua from Telephony team presenting interaction-less processing. Also we have William Timion from Telephony team with us to answer the chat questions during the session. There are a few logistics you should know before we get started. The tutorial will be recorded and posted to the Tech Tutorials page of the Customer Care website in a week. You will receive an email with a recording link when it is available. Phone lines will be muted until the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If you need clarifications about the material during the session, you can type your questions into the Q&A window and William will answer those questions, unless a question would be better answered during the Q&A discussion at the end. Please be aware that we cannot address questions or issues about existing cases. When you exit the webinar, a brief survey will be displayed in your web browser. Thank you for taking a minute to complete the survey. Genesys uses this feedback to improve our tech tutorials. And now I will turn the session over to Garima.
Thank you, Vasunti. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Bill, for helping me here. So in this tech tutorial, we will cover what is interaction-less processing, services covered under interaction-less processing, configuration you have to do in ORS and Composer, a project to use in interaction-less processing, detail about ORS external interfaces with example, and the example will be shared in the presentation with simple debugging steps and where we can use interaction-less processing. So in orchestration platform, interfaces provided which can be used to control and monitor the execution of orchestration logic by external system. It has two forms. One for external system like web services and HTTP, one for other orchestration logic running in the platform. And these interface has two parts like action interface, which are SOAP and HTTP based for external system. There is also an XML based element schema or standard SEXML elements for other orchestration logic session. The second is the events that are generated by orchestration platform on behalf of orchestration logic for external systems as well as other orchestration logic. The integrated processing used in this interface to control and command orchestration logic session using the RESTful request is called interaction-less processing. As the orchestration logic session is directly triggered in ORS without creating any interaction or call, that's why the name, that means there is no interaction ID generated. That's why the name comes as interaction-less processing. In interaction-less processing, you can trigger the session by sending HTTP request and control or get information during session execution using HTTP request. These controlling parts are called services. The main services which are used in orchestration platform using the sets of RESTful APIs which we can use to interact with the SEXML sessions. These services are start, terminate, event, request, query. These APIs are triggered from your application, which is your REST client, as a request to orchestration platform, and response is sent from orchestration platform to your application. Now we will, in the upcoming slides, I will detail these services and show them in action. So the first service we will start is start service. The start service will trigger orchestration platform to create these sessions, create the orchestration logic sessions. This service can be used to trigger execution of those SEXML document that doesn't depends on interaction event to starts. When I say interaction events, like interaction.added, interaction.present, and so on. Once you start the session, you can later create interaction you can later create interaction, and you can even use this session to make calls and send email depending on what logic you write. So the URL syntax which we will use an HTTP request for start service will be will contain a host of orchestration server port, the HTTP port of orchestration server slash scxml slash session. And because it's a start service, so we have start, and then we will give source of our scxml page which we want to trigger using the start service. And if there is any parameter which you want to pass in the start of the orchestration logic, you can send it here. Then come query service. In query service, your application will send a query request to the current sessions running to get the state and information about the session. You don't need to send any scxml document in the detail in this query. All you need is the session id. So again, the orchestration host and http port of orchestration server slash scxml slash session, then the session id of which detail of from which you want to get the details, and query. For this, we generally we respond with the interaction elements. Then next is event service. In event service, your application will send a request which allow a particular orchestration logic event to execute or how to be handled. There is, depending on how you have written in your orchestration logic, there is no return data will become detail will be coming by default. So unless otherwise you have specified that, okay, if this event is triggered, I need this information to be returning back, then only the information will come back. The developer doesn't need to add a wait event or response for it, as ORS is designed to automatically respond to a defined event. So if you have predefined event, you can in ORS, it can be responded by ORS automatically. You don't have to specifically add any detail of that. It can be even used to execute a certain set of code for transitioning to the the set to the target state which you want to proceed further. So URL for this will have scxml slash session slash the session id in which you want to send this event, and slash event and the event name. You can see over here. The request, the next service is request service. In this, we will send a request in from which we are actually expecting a response. So we are explicitly defining a request to be processed in orchestration logic, and also you can expect, unlike your event service, and response to be correct, and it can be handled properly as you have defined in your strategy. So the difference between request and event is there is a response coming, and you have a response is expected for this request services. So the URL will have a host IP, orchestration host IP, then port, HTTP port of ORS, scxml session ID, and the request slash event name. So the event name which you have defined for your request to process in your strategy should be given there. And if you have any parameters which you want to add to be sent to execute in the request service, you can add it as well. The terminate service will is if you want to abruptly terminate the existing session, or you don't want to you want to clear the session which are already existing, or you don't need to have a start to trigger this terminate session. So if the session is being triggered by something else, you can also terminate by using this request. And this has to be done to ensure the proper session cleanup is done in the ORS. Sometimes if your session is stuck waiting for an event or something, and those events are not there, the session will keep on will be there in the session map of ORS. So terminate service will be used to clear those sessions. The syntax example is scxml slash session, the session ID which you want to terminate, and slash terminate. So before we see how it actually work in the real time, I'll tell you the default configuration which you have to do in the ORS side and as well as on your Composer project side. In ORS configuration, you have to add your HTTP port to communicate from the external interface. So by default, we generally give 7210. So once you give that, you can actually see if it is if your ORS is running the interface by giving HTTP colon slash slash your host orchestration IP address and this port, and you can see a default page opening for ORS. And in Composer project, in the IPD, you have to define an interactionless session is going to in the event. So if you in IPD, when you open event and you click over here in the event pop-up, you can set interactionless. Uh, by default, we give interactionless type in the present. So in that, we will have a default setting of interactionless processing. The name will be there. This will enable you to define a basic application start in event in your IPD to proceed further. But if you want to have more custom events to be added in interactionless processing to be predefined and can be used later, you can use a custom event section in your event pop-up, and you can define those events there. So SCXML code generation for event will be, so as I said, as you have defined interactionless processing, your application start will have will be generating your session, and as you can see, interactionless processing will be added over there. So now we will see in action how your orchestration ORS external interface works with your REST client and how what happens in ORS log side. So before we proceed further, I will show you what these external RESTful APIs meant in the SCXML function side. So when we send session start, your session start SCXML function will be triggered. When you send when you send terminate, your terminate function will be executed for session. When we are sending an event name with the parameters, your send XCXML send function will be executed. When we are sending a request, your session function, session-based SCXML function fetch will be executed over here. And in the query part, there is no SCXML function corresponding to that. At that instant, it will just pick all your interaction data and share it back as a response. You can get these details available in our document page as well. So let's see if all these services are used in a particular single session, how actually it happens. So from your REST client, we'll start to start an SCXML session, we send a start service, which creates your session, generate your session ID, and send session ID as a response. And then you want to get the interaction data, you send query request, which execute your query and collect your interaction parameters and send the interaction parameters as a response. When you send publish event request, it executes the XCXML definition for the event and sends 200 OK plus event response if there is any. When you send a request with the parameter, if there is any parameter you need to send, it executes the SCXML definition for this request and sends you the response parameter and 200 OK. So as I said, you have to define event and request services in your SEXML logic. And if you want, and after everything, all the you can execute query, publish event, and request multiple time as you have defined in your orchestration logic before you terminate the request. Or if you want to terminate in the middle also, you can do. So when you terminate the request, it clears the session from your session maps, clear the session detail from your Cassandra if using persistence, and 200 OK will be sent to your REST client. Now we will see step by step how your request is being formed and what response do we get. So to start SEXML session, as I said, you have to give your server port SEXML /session or /start. If you don't give, in certain scenario, you don't have to give your source for your script details. And if you directly, you can directly also give as in the, I'm sorry, in the configuration object, we have script. We can directly give the configuration object name of your enhanced routing script. And if you have multi-tenant environment, you can give your script details along with your tenant name. So it is a post request which we sent with the HTTP header of URL encoded. We are not sending it as a JSON format. So it is a direct SEXML format. In response, we will give session ID. And if there is any error response, we will get HTTP 404 if corresponding response, error response. So if you see an example, so I have used these example using the Postman as my REST client. So if you see, we are sending post request. In this, we are giving localhost with the with 7210, which I showed previously as my HTTP port for ORS. Then SEXML /session/start. Then source. In source, I'm defining my SEXML URL. So I have hosted in Composer Tomcat, and I'm directly giving the IPD URL. And header, which I'm giving as content type equals to application x www form URL encoded. So when this so the final URL will be formed in this format. It will have localhost this thing with source information. So your source parameter will be incorporated as source equals to HTTP, your SEXML URL, and it will be sent to ORS. In response, you will get session ID. So if you see in ORS logs, the request is received over here. So you can see the source is coming, and so once this source is once this request is received, it creates your session, and your session ID is generated, and this session ID as a response is sent to your REST client. To stop an SEXML session, we'll send your session ID to terminate as a parameter in a HTTP post request, and the response we are waiting for is 200 OK. So if you see post request and the URL is my session ID, you can see I have a session ID map over here, and terminate, and the response I received is 200 OK. So in execution, in the ORS logs, you can see the request coming. So it's a post request, which is coming for this particular session to terminate. And in this, it will execute. So it was waiting for an event to come. So it will terminate that, it will exit from that state. It will exit from your workflow. It will clear it from your session map. The session will be cleared from session map, and 200 OK will be sent to your REST client. So now coming to the query query which we send. So you can send multiple session ID for the response, and the request has to be gone. The HTTP request has to use get method, because we are getting the request, and the response we will get session ID. Along with the session ID, we will get URL of the application and name attribute, type attribute, your data properties, your Genesys properties. So all interaction parameter will be coming. And if the session is not formed, then you will get 404 error. Sorry. So as you can see, we send the get request, and we are directly sending to a query to session ID, and in the response you get URL, as I mentioned earlier, the name of the workflow which it is executing, your type detail, your current state, what current state it is in, and then your Genesys parameter, your data parameters. So if you look in the execution, so the request is being received, it will trigger the query, and it will extract all the interaction parameter which we have to forward to REST client, and it will form after collecting all this data, it will form it properly and send the response as this. So in ORS logs, you can see what URL is going, what is the name which is currently diagram which is currently executed, the current state which is running, and the Genesys parameter and data parameter which it collected previously over here. So send request. So for this, we have to define. You cannot send request directly. The logic has to be defined in your SEXML application. It has to go as a post request, and you can send not only in simple XML format, but also in encoding can be in JSON format also. And in parameters, you have to send session ID, the request name, and if you have set up parameters to be coming as input, then you have to set as that. And whatever logic you have defined, so if you have defined that once this request is come, I should get the value of certain parameters, or it should run and go to this next state. So it will send the detail response which you have sent along with the HTTP header. So for the example, I have created a request called get X data. So in get X data, I have set to transition which has to happen. If it is a positive response, so an event get X data, this is the request event which we are expecting when the request event get X data is received, and the condition, if it satisfies this condition for my parameter, then it should respond as a parameter name result. So result, I've set a value in my entry block, and I'll ask it to send the result R data. So your R data is the variable which I have set, and it will be sent, the information, the value mapped to R data will be sent if the positive, if the condition is matched. If the condition is not matched, that is if I'm expecting a negative response. So for this, the event get X data, when the value is coming as, if no parameter is defined, which is a negative scenario for me, then result code should come as invalid parameter. So over here, if a positive responses go, we are waiting for we are expecting an R data value to come into the picture, and if the parameters values are not sent, then we are expecting a result to come as invalid parameter. So we will send a post request. So in this, you can say I have sent X data is my request event name, and in the parameter, I'm sending the value as test value. If I want a negative response, I can skip the parameter. So in param, I would have either given empty value or no value at all. And because it's a positive response and I was expecting the value of test of R data to come as a response, I get result test success. So in the execution, you can see the request is being received over here. and the execution of the strategy or that particular get x data is been happening. So over here you can see get x data is the event way name which I have sent, and the param name param is not equal to empty value, so that is set as true. The condition has been satisfied. So now we are going to send the transition selected, and we are going to execute the result as our data. So our data value was test success, so this will be result code will be sent. So in the response we are sending result success, result test success. Coming to the last service, that is publish event. In this, when we are sending an event name to a particular session, we can send it either in a JSON format or an XML format, and we are not expecting a firm response to come apart from 200 OK. Then we will that's the difference it makes from request and event. So a simple event to be sent from external interface to orchestration logic, where it takes the event and execute what event has to be processed. So in my simple strategy, I have defined wait event. In wait event block, I have defined a transition event. So when I select the transition, and I have defined an event called test event. When I receive an event called test event from in my ORS orchestration platform, then it should move to next block. So next block I have set it will move to the next block. So if you can see, I have set a post request, and in this the test event is there. The name test event has been sent, and once this is executed, I get 200 OK. So in the execution part, the request is received. Once this request is received, you can see the event name is test event has been received, and event processing has been started. So according to the event processing, after the test event has been received, you will transfer to the next state, that is SCXML state 1, and 200 OK should be sent as a result. So in response, we will get 200 OK. So all these flows you can have it. You can see the demo video in which I have given a live demo executing all these events again, which is available with this presentation, and along with the project which I have shown a simple strategy to execute your request event and your wait event and so on is there. A caution, this strategy was created using the Composer version 8.5, 8.1.500.03. So in this particular demo, I have created two sessions. One because it's the terminate, to show that terminate can be done at any stage. So there is a separate session for that, and for all the requests, there is a separate session. So I have even attached the sample orchestration logs, so you can compare and see what actually happens when this request and response process happen. So when and all said and done, when interactionless processing is being done and you are getting stuck, there are a couple of basic debugging steps which you can use to check why it is getting stuck. So if the SCXML session is not triggering as expected, so make sure your ORS HTTP port is up and running, it is defined, and there is no issue with that. And second thing, in your Composer, make sure your interactionless processing is at least defined. So if you are using custom events, so in that case also make sure your interactionless processing is there. And if, say, suppose you send a query, and if the query is received for this particular session after the session ended, so the query will respond. If the persistent exists, it will simply says 404 session not found, and it means it's a successful result and your session has been finished. And if persistent does not exist, then it will be respond at 404 session not found, persistent is not available. So it depends, depending on your persistence, the information will come differently. So accordingly, you can debug your session. So you can see whether your session is terminated or still running. So where this interactionless processing is used. So the major player where interactionless processing is hero is in GMS. So in GMS, your session, you have created a service in a callback service in GMS, and that will be triggered from GMS to ORS using interactionless processing. So in that, as I mentioned earlier, once your interactionless processing session has been generated, you can use further to create to make a call or to send an event by creating an interaction. So that's what GMS does. It initiates with interactionless processing session, and later it creates a callback call. And apart from that, you generally, if you have a simple application where you are using web servers and web requests, you can use this for debugging purposes. And if you are integrating your ORS platform with your application, you can use interactionless processing to use orchestration logic and your application properly. So this concludes my topic of interactionless processing. So before we start question and answer session, I would like to mention few other resources that are available to customer and partners. So Genesys University offers troubleshooting workshop that can increase your understanding of Genesys products and solution. For more details, please visit GU website as listed here. Please visit the Genesys knowledge base to access a variety of information about Genesys products, including how to solve common problems. The URL is provided here. And also we have a set of next tutorials will be presenting by reporting and analytic team and voice self-service team, which will be held in Feb and April respectively. These dates are yet to be decided. Please visit our tech tutorial website to register for these tech tutorial and give your input on future tech tutorial topics.
Thank you, Garima. Now let's start our Q&A session. Please click the hand icon on the meeting screen or on the participant screen, and your phone lines will be unmuted. You can also type a question in the questions chat window. Okay, we have a question. What real world scenarios are ideal for interaction-less transactions? Garima, would you like to answer that?
Yes, thank you for the question. So for the real world scenario, as I mentioned, one of the scenario which we use in Genesys components is callback scenario and GMS. And apart from that, you can use, if you are using your interface, you can create your interface to extract query details about the running session. You can get those date information. So it's just an HTTP request and response, which set of request and response, which we allow ORS to use to get the information which you require or control your orchestration logic. So one of the real-time application which we use in detail is in callback services.
Thank you. We have a question. Your lines have been unmuted. Kindly ask your question.
Thank you. My question is, if we're going to use this, like say, for example, in callback, where would we, is there training available to get expertise in this, or is this something we should go through professional services to implement and deploy?
So for GMS training, I think the GU takes it, and professional service can also help you with the setting of this. But if you want, if you already have the existing environment, you can see the request happening in GMS, and the session is being created using interactionless processing. You can let me know if it clears your query, or do you need more information?
Just one last question on reporting. Is there any reporting on these interactions, specifically callback, that can be used, or is this something external? As we can see this, happening, whether it was successful or unsuccessful.
Recording related for a particular service?
Yes, for like, say for example, this interaction list. Is there any reporting capabilities, analytics that come with this, or are we just using the?
So you can use the event in which you can send reporting information. So in the orchestration logic itself, you can define that these parameters has to be used as a user data, or these parameter has to be sent to your reporting part, where you can collect all this information. So as it's as simple as current all the ORS sessions. So at certain stage, if you are in your logic, if you are adding that once this particular event has been executed, I need this information to be sent to reporting part to give the that this part till this has been executed. So you can define your reporting details in your logic itself.
Right, thank you. That's all the questions I have. Thank you very much.
We have a question for what kind of details you can query from ORS session by interactionless processing, and where those data can be used.
Okay.
The question has been asked in the chat.
So depending if you are using query service, so you can get all the interaction data along with along with URL and what diagram and what state you are running it. So using this information, depending on what you have defined in your application. So when I'm talking about application, is your REST client. So from picking up those variable, how you want to proceed further, you can use it in your application side. If you are using event, if you are using request option, request service, so when you are sending this request, the execution will happen. So if you are sending any parameter, any value of any system parameter or a user parameter, and you want that to be executed on this, and a particular response or particular value have to be updated in your orchestration logic, it will update it over there. And as well as some parameter values which you are waiting as a response will be coming. And again, these response which you can use it in your in the definition of your application to use it further. So say suppose you have a simple application in which you are sending a request to collect the session ID, and that session ID you are planning to give it to your customer as a complaint number, their complaint number. So when you are triggering it, triggering a start request, a session ID is being generated. That session ID you can take it in your REST client, from in your application, you can take the value which is received as a response for your start service, and you can use it to give it as a complaint number, for example, as I said, to your customer. And they can use it in reference when they make a call to your, and you can pick the session from there.
Thank you for the question. I hope it cleared your query. How application knows which interaction it should query, or it will query all interactions and supply data back to apps?
So when to know which interaction it has to query, over here we will not use the term interaction, we'll use the term session because there is no interaction generated over here. So coming on session, so we will give session ID when we are querying it. So if say suppose, if you are starting, you should starting a service from your interactionless processing itself. So you will have your interaction, your session ID. You can use the session ID to query all the details. And if you want to query multiple session, you have to give the session IDs. So apart from your start service where we are creating your session ID, rest everywhere you need to give your session ID, which you can get it from your orchestration platform.
Thank you. We have a question in the Q&A window. Can interactionless routing be used to query the availability of an agent group?
Yes, you can use, depending if you have defined the in the logic. So for that you have to because the details you can create trigger a URS function or any URS function to extract the agent information, so you can use it. So you have to define it in your SXML logic. So the function has to be defined over there.
Thank you very much. At this time, we have no more questions. Now you will see a poll window in your screen. We shall wait for 1 minute until all the participants completely take the survey. Thank you for taking a moment to complete this brief survey, as your feedback really does help us improve our tech tutorial programs. Thank you, Garima and William, for sharing this information. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We look forward to seeing you on our next tech tutorial. This concludes today's webinar.